There was always light around looking at the darkness, and that's the point. We go through the darkness to get to the light, and a really good therapist will hold that light for their clients even when they can't feel it themselves. And part of that holding that light is knowing that you have survived the worst of what's happened to you. You're still here.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. So, picture this. You're walking through your hometown and you notice something unsettling. Conversations are sharper, divisions deeper, and the air seems changed with tension and fear. But imagine if someone told you that what you're witnessing isn't political discord or social unrest, but the symptoms of a patient desperate in need of healing. On today's podcast, we are going to talk to an amazing guest, Phyllis Leavitt, who has discussed all these interesting scenarios in her book. And she is a licensed psychotherapist with over 3 decades of experience treating families, couples, and individuals dealing with the aftermath of abuse and trauma. Phyllis has done something unprecedented. She's taken everything she knows about healing and applied it to the entire nation in her groundbreaking book, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. So, get ready for a master therapist's diagnosis of our collective psyche, and more importantly, her prescription not just for healing, but for overall well-being. Get ready for an amazing conversation today. Phyllis, welcome to our podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here with you today. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, yeah, me too. I think what you're doing here is very powerful, very strong, and I think that everybody listening is going to be inspired not just by your story and your tips, but also the writing process too. So let's go right into it. Phyllis, I'm wondering if you can just shine a little light on, what exactly led you to psychotherapy and ultimately what led you to the decision to put it into the form of a book.
Yeah, well, what led me to psychotherapy was really being on my own healing journey from childhood trauma. And in my mid 30s, people were starting to talk about psychotherapy and going to see a therapist. And before that, it was kind of like something that people sort of looked at you like, you should be able to get over it yourself. But it was becoming a little bit more mainstream at that time. And I went, and it was just life-changing for me to finally understand that the things that were causing me so much pain internally and the ways that I wasn't coping well in my external world were not because I was a flawed person or there was something intrinsically wrong with me, but because some of my early conditioning had been really traumatic and I had developed a defense structure that was really just designed to protect me, but it wasn't working well. I went to the library after the first session I went to and took out a book on psychology and started reading about early childhood conditioning. And it just changed my life, the whole process. I stopped being such a mystery to myself. I felt like over time, with a lot of really good hard work, which I think sometimes psychotherapy is, and good guidance, I got myself out of the darkest part of my life and decided to become a psychotherapist. And I think that's true for a lot of people. What helps us, we want to turn around and share that with other people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really inspiring that you kind of took what you've gone through and then also your knowledge that you gained through the process of, your training and your practice, and now it's in a book so that other people going through similar situations could also learn from it. That's extremely powerful. So, a little bit about the book. Well, first off, I see that you have it right there behind you. I'm wondering if you want to kind of show it off to the camera a little bit. Everyone always loves to check out cover designs, and I see yours is very bold with the title right in the front.
Yeah. Yep, that's it. And really, I just wanted to make it bold and noticeable because there's a lot of chatter out there in the world today.
Yeah, and when you see the title right there, front and center, it draws the eye and also encourages readers to take a look. They're curious to know, okay, what's this about? And it also shows very bright red and blue colors, which is also a great indicator for what we're talking about today. I mean, red, white, and blue, right? So.
Right.
So, if we were to open the book a little bit, clearly it's a very groundbreaking book. So I'm wondering if we could chat a little bit more about it. I was looking through, some of the pages online, and I saw that you draw parallels between dysfunctional families and our current political climate. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through it. What are some of the most striking similarities that you observed?
Well, one of the things that became obvious to me as a psychotherapist, because so much of therapy today is focused around an understanding of family systems, we don't see people as islands anymore. Like you're just solely responsible for your dysfunction or your upset or your despair or your addiction, but that we're really parts of families. We come into families when we're born, and we're very much conditioned by the values and the behaviors and the role models of the people
Mhm.
that we depend on the most. And that, of course, starts from the moment of birth, or maybe even before that. And so, just became obvious to me that we're in lots of different family systems, large and small. Our own families, our communities, our states, our government, maybe our religion is a kind of community, and all businesses, and they're all really actually operating on either healthy or unhealthy family dynamics. And
Mm.
since we're so steeped in that in the world of psychology, it was not a far cry to see that in a nutshell, what a healthy family looks like. And of course, just to say, nobody does this perfectly. We're all imperfect human beings. And sometimes we make mistakes, or we lash out, or we get depressed, or we drink too much, or whatever. But in a healthy family, we support each other to be our best selves. Everyone is included. There are some basic guidelines and rules that are in place for the healthy functioning of the family. And that might be one of the big ones often is that there's a commitment to peaceful conflict resolution, that when people are upset with each other, they're not going to call each other names or hit each other or beat each other or kick each other out of the house or assault each other sexually or anything like that. There's just an understanding of what the container is for working out relationship. And there's a commitment to supporting one another to be our best selves while we're in this larger container of a family unit. So there's a balance between what the individual wants and needs and what's good for the individual, and what are the needs of the family and what's good for the family. And that's a constant, ongoing, growing, evolving dialogue in a healthy family. And again, sometimes two steps forward, one step back. But also part of a healthy family is a willingness to learn from each other and learn from our mistakes and do it differently in the future. And so if we look at the United States, as I call it, the family of America, because it operates on a family model. If you look at it that way, there are people in charge, like the parents. There are people who depend on the people in charge for their welfare and their well-being. And there's a whole set of laws and rules governing how we're supposed to operate with regard to one another, from the smallest personal interactions to the largest national issues. And in a healthy family, in a healthy country, I believe, a country that was operating on a healthy set of family dynamics, there would be a lot of open dialogue. There would be inclusiveness. There would be a desire to provide for all family members. Just like in a family, we would say people were mentally unwell if they were beating one person, or they were starving one person, or they were locking somebody out of the house, or they were spending all their money on firearms and not feeding half of the family. So if you look at the country through that lens, are we operating on any kind of a healthy family dynamic? And if not, not looking for who to blame and shame and punish and exact retribution on, but how do we heal? When families come to therapy, and certainly not all families do, but when a family comes to therapy and they're having problems, and they're not treating each other well, or they can't stop fighting, or they can't stop blaming and shaming each other, we help them learn to listen deeply with compassion for each other and ignite a desire for resolution and reconnection, which is what we all want. We all want safe belonging and love with other people. We want to be valued. We want to be supported to be our best selves. And that disconnect between what we all want and what we allow in larger family systems is a mental health issue that we've been conditioned to believe is a partisan issue. Because why? Because mentally healthy people don't shoot each other. They don't steal from each other. They don't exploit each other. They don't discriminate. Against, a certain color of skin or a gender or an economic group. So I'm putting a whole lot into a few sentences here, but does that kind of give you an idea of the correlation between psychotherapy and looking at America as a family?
Oh, it definitely is. I think you did a great job of explaining it too. And it's a very unique approach, but you're completely valid. I mean, in a way, we are all in a bunch of different families depending on what the context is. So, it definitely makes sense as to why your book is so important because just kind of looking at it at a different lens and helping to address some solutions for all these terrible things that have been going on. For example, you write about the terror of the situation in America, what people need to understand about our current psychological state based on that. One of the examples you mentioned was mass shootings and how we should probably look at that through a psychological lens rather than just focusing on gun control. I'm wondering if you want to offer some
Sure.
insight onto that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of where the field of psychology, I think, has so much more to offer than we make use of. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because there's so much that this field has to offer to help us come back to loving, safe connection with one another and cooperation. So, I did a little bit of research on the Uvalde shooter, and I talk about that in my book. And he apparently came from a childhood where there was addiction, and he apparently had a speech impediment that he was bullied and shamed for in school and didn't get the help he needed. There were some, I don't know all of the details, but this was a kid who was disconnected from a sense of safe, loving, caring, esteemed belonging. And one of the things that I read was that he was called the school shooter long before he actually perpetrated his crime, uh,
Really?
which was really sad because there was an understanding that this was a kid in trouble. This was a kid who was at risk and was a risk to other people. But from the field of psychology, what we know is that people don't go into a classroom and shoot up innocent children unless they're really hurting, unless they're really in a rage, unless they haven't gotten the help and the sense of caring belonging that they need or being provided for. They don't, you or I wouldn't go into a schoolroom and think of shooting up children if we have love and belonging in our lives. It wouldn't even come into our mind. And so it takes an extraordinary amount of mental emotional disturbance to set a person up to perpetrate a crime like that. And we need to understand that, because if we're going to really break the cycle, let's just say of mass shootings or gun violence, we have to help people start to feel like they matter, like they're cared for, like their needs are important to our society, that we care that they're fed, we care that they get the medical care that they need, we care that they get an education that can help them earn a significant living. And that's what a good family does for family members, and so a family that is treating its family members and its children that way is most likely not going to produce a mass shooter. And I think we have to take that lens and put it on our country. These are not just evil people. These are people who are suffering and have not gotten the help that they need, and maybe not gotten the restraint that they need. But restraint with the idea that if there's any way that you could be rehabilitated back to your essential loving self and be supported to manifest your full potential in the world, that we're a nation that's committed to doing that for people and not just locking them up and throwing away the key.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of what your book is taking a first step on, right? Like, the first step toward, I guess I should say,
Right,
offering those solutions and, rehabilitation instead of punishment, I guess, like,
right,
and preemptively too, I'm sure, of course, like
right.
offering those ways to deal with the trauma first. So, diving into the writing process of this, I mean, it clearly was a very complicated endeavor to take on. I'm wondering if you had a certain kind of approach to this. For example, research and preparation. I'm sure there was a lot of that. What was your exact approach to that? I mean, you had to analyze an entire nation after all.
Well, originally, I didn't even have the idea to do any research. Originally, all I wanted to do was sort of discuss different case studies, my own experience with trauma, people I've worked with, and principles for healing out of those case studies. That's really all I wanted to do. And for a number of years, I was just writing that kind of book. Um, and then I got to a place where I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to put together everything that I had written. And
Mhm.
the best move that I made at that point, and I would really advise this probably to anybody who's writing a book, is get a really good editor. I got a really, really good editor. And from the very first meeting I had with her about the idea of my book, she talked about doing research, and sort of dividing the book into, it's not written this way, but conceptually dividing it into personal experience, why I wrote the book, case studies that illustrate points, professional observation, and research about what's going on currently and historically in our country. And really, I just want to say the things that I write about psychologically could apply to anybody or any country in the world. But since I'm living in the United States and was brought up in the United States, I just addressed this to America because that's the country I'm familiar with. Um, but so getting an editor and getting that feedback, because sometimes you can't see what you can't see. And another set of eyes that's trained to look at your material in your book can just be extraordinarily helpful. And I really feel like she expanded the whole scope of my book by including the idea of doing research. And it was not my favorite thing to do. I'll tell you that. It was not my favorite thing to do, but you know what? I learned so much from doing the research that's in my book. So there's a lot of examples of things that have happened in our country, both presently and historically, that really back up and illustrate the psychological points that I'm trying to make. I think that's a very important part of the kind of nonfiction that I wrote.
Of course. And thank you for diving into that and explaining a little bit more about it. And I think one of the most important things that you mentioned there is the importance of a great editor, too. You always need to have a second set of eyes on it and to really help you not only develop your ideas, but make them credible and back them up with that research. So, really
Right.
important stuff. Now, though, of course, I mean, what you're talking about is very emotionally heavy trauma, national crisis. It's not an easy, fluffy topic. So, I think this is something that a lot of authors could learn from based on your example. How did you balance being your own self care while writing this? I mean, for me, I would feel kind of sad after a writing session. I'm sure maybe you had a sort of routine to go about this. How was it like for you?
Well, I think it's sort of like being a therapist or doing your own work. Doing my own work, I delved into some very painful parts of my life. But the good part of that was, as difficult as some of remembering things that happened to me was, the good part was that there was something healing about being able to speak my truth. And I can't really stress that enough. There's something about feeling free and being honored and supported to really speak your truth and own your story that helps us recover from it. It's the ways that it gets buried and festers inside because we're afraid to face it, or we can't remember it, or we're ashamed of ourselves, or we've done hurtful things ourselves out of our own pain, that keeps that boiling inside and keeps us symptomatic. And being in a non-judgmental, supportive place to actually process your pain and tell your story can be incredibly healing just by itself. And I think we need to do that as a country. You
Mhm.
know, The original settlers here, for many, many of them, and many of the immigrants that have come over the years, came from poverty. They came from war. They came from religious persecution. They came from starvation. And they brought their traumas with them and never had a chance to heal because we didn't talk about healing trauma in the 1400s or the 1700s or even maybe 100 years ago, we weren't talking about it. So, I think that's just a really important part of the process. So for me, there was always light around looking at the darkness. And that's the point. We go through the darkness to get to the light. And a really good therapist will hold that light for their clients, even when they can't feel it themselves. And part of that holding that light is knowing that you have survived the worst of what's happened to you. You're still here. You're still trying. You're still hoping for something better. You're still making efforts to improve your life. And good therapy, whether it's for a person, a family, or a nation, taps into that desire to heal and supports it and knows that each person, I fully believe this, that each person was born as an infant, a totally innocent, loving being, wired for love and connection. And the dysfunction that we end up manifesting as adults is a result of faulty conditioning.
Thank you so much for kind of diving into that for us. It's definitely inspiring to think about, but um, and it's admirable that you were able to come up with this sort of process to really get the words down on paper. And thank you also for connecting it to the overall topic too. I think it's really important that we keep going back to that, and that's the only way we can really hone it in for all the audience too. That being said, though, this actually is not your only book. I understand that you have three other books as well. I'm wondering if you want to speak a little bit about those and how does American Therapy differ from the other spiritual memoirs that you've written?
Yeah, it's actually two other books.
Oh, my mistake. Three total.
No, that's okay. The first two books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, are really about my own healing journey because it
Right.
was so profound for me. And I was really one of those people who didn't think I was really going to come out of the darkness I was living in. I was a single mom. I had three little kids. I was just at such a dark place in my life, and memories were starting to bubble up from my unconscious of some of the trauma from my early life, and it was overwhelming. And it gives me so much compassion for people who have been traumatized and who are still being traumatized and have no help and no rescue and no place of safety. I mean, I was in a relatively safe place in my life when I was able to start working on myself. So I felt like I kept a journal the whole time I was in my own process of working through what had happened to me as a child. And I had made a commitment to myself that if I ever found the light at the end of the tunnel, I would write about it and share it with other people. Because before I went into therapy and in the beginning stages of therapy myself, I read a lot of books by people who had overcome trauma and really very seriously harmful things that had happened to them and revitalized themselves and reclaimed their lives. And so and it was so helpful and hopeful for me to read those books. And I thought, if I ever get through this, I will do that. So the first two books are really about what I went through in recovering the memories that I had. And for me, and this happens for some people, it doesn't necessarily happen for all, but for me, I just made the most profound spiritual connection to my essence in that process of recovering from what happened to me in my childhood. And I felt like I had a source of inner guidance that really helped clear the path for me moving forward in my life. Because recovering what happened to us as in our early conditioning that has deformed maybe the way we look at life or the way we cope, um, opens up the potential. And then what do you do with that potential? And so what I discovered is, and I think this is true for many people, you naturally know what your potential is once you've cleared away the debris of the things that have hurt you or covered over your greatest self. For some people, it's, that they just become better parents, or they start to go into their creativity more and really dive into their music or their art or their love for animals, or they start a community project, or they become a therapist like I did. And for me, it was always, I always wanted to be a writer. And so for me, it connected me to writing about, my own journey. And so the healing and the writing, they all came together in one piece. But it's very different for different people. And it's really important that we don't model ourselves on anybody else, but really to learn to trust that inner guidance. And that's what those first two books are about for me, was hearing guidance from within and learning to trust it and move with it. And there's a whole lot more in those books than that, but but that's just a little taste.
Thank you for that. I love that you not only talked about the books, but also your own personal experience with it. I think it's something that a lot of authors, especially the ones listening today, can connect with because it is deeply emotional, it is cathartic, it is healing, and that's exactly what you described. That being said, and from what I'm gathering from this conversation, something tells me that this book that we're talking about today is not the last one you might be writing. I'm wondering if you happen to have any others on the agenda or even considering.
I have ideas for a couple of more books that I really want to write. I'm not quite ready to write them because my time and energy right now is invested in getting America and therapy out into the world, because I feel like the need for healing ourselves on a collective level in terms of our mental health and the way we treat ourselves and each other is so urgent that that's kind of where my energy is going. But I do have ideas for like a second set, a sequel to American Therapy that covers topics that I didn't cover in this book, because there's only so much you can write in one book, right? And then I also have an idea for bringing psychology and spirituality together in a book, because I feel like for a lot of people, the idea of spirituality is either woo-woo or airy-fairy, or it's tied to a religious doctrine. And I see spirituality as really whatever our path is to connecting to our most essential selves, our soul, if you call it that, or your spirit, if you call it that, or your essence, if you call it that, and manifesting that in the world. Like, I don't see it as leaving the earth plane. I don't see it as nirvana. And although, I don't put down if people have those experiences, and I've had some very, very far out spiritual experiences, but they've all brought me back to being a more loving, cooperative, self-reflective person in my ordinary life. And I think I'll be on that journey forever. So, yeah, there may be a sequel to American Therapy, or it may look very different, and it may be a way that I try to combine that. Because one of the things that I feel about spirituality, having been in some spiritual groups when I was young, which I was, and they were helpful, learning to some kind of meditative practices or turning within, or, breaking old patterns and not being on automatic pilot all the time. Um, some of the things I learned in spiritual practice were very, very helpful. But for me, the psychological piece was missing. And that's why I turned to psychology and therapy, because there was trauma in there that just really needed to be healed on a psychological level. But what I see is that people bring either their mental health or their mental ill health often to their religious practices or their spirituality. So a good example for that would be, and way back in the day, like this was in my 20s when I was in a spiritual group, everybody idolized the teacher and they gave their power away to the teacher. That was an emotional, psychological issue. I believe that a true teacher helps you find that true teacher within you, your own guidance within you. And like any teacher, you graduate and you go on your way. And so I think we bring, the angry God, the judgmental parent. These are all psychological issues that have been superimposed on a lot of religious doctrines and practices. And I think they need to be separated out for our well-being, so that we don't give our power away or use, the unconscious desire to project evil onto others into that realm.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I like that a lot. Don't give your power away, right? Like, be aware of it, be aware of what's going on. So I can see how all of your work does exemplify this. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Now, if people want to get in touch and see more information about this upcoming project of yours or the book itself, or perhaps they want to help you respond to humanity's cry for help, where should they start? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is my name. It's www.phyllisleavitt.com. There's a place on there where you can contact me. You can also email me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. I'm on all the social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. I have articles on Substack. You can message me in any of those places, and I'm very happy to connect with anybody who wants more information. I also just recently created a book bundle, which I'm advertising on my newsletter and on social media, which has the ebook. It has 2 PDF small courses on conflict resolution. It has a full course that you can apply for applying American therapy to your own life, and it has the audiobook. And that's available through my website like I said, I've advertised that on social media as well.
Okay, well, amazing. Well, I'm going to put the links to all that in the description box of the podcast today. So if you're interested, everybody, especially in that bundle package, go ahead and click over once we're finished with the podcast today and learn a little bit about it and get connected with Phyllis. Now, Phyllis, I'm wondering if you happen to have any other insights that you'd like to leave the audience with as we begin to wrap up today. Any insights regarding your theories or with the writing process in general? What should we leave them with? What do you
Yeah,
think?
well, for about the writing process, I will say if you're called to write, write and just keep on writing. I have been in a writing group for over 20 years with the same people, and we bounce ideas off of each other. We share our work. It's inspirational, it's supportive.
Mhm.
Um, I would recommend that for anybody. Get an editor if you're writing a book. And then the other thing I would just say is from the more psychological point of view, and really let me just say this, that in the writing process, there was a time at the very end of finishing the edits for my book where I really felt like I couldn't do it. It felt overwhelming, and I felt like I could never actually get the book completed. And I remember sitting at my desk and just sobbing and thinking, I can't do this after all the effort I've put in. And you know what? I just pushed myself through it. And one of the things that really helped me, and this came from my editor, and I've never forgotten it, that helped me push myself through it was reconnecting to why I was doing it. And why I was writing this book was just simply because I want to be of service with what has helped me. And so, for anybody out there, if you're feeling stuck or blocked or doubtful about what you're doing or feel like a fraud or whatever it is, just come back to your why. Why are you doing this? And feel the inspiration of that and move with that. And it'll get you through.
That's so inspirational. You're clearly very passionate about what we've been discussing today. I can just hear it in your voice, and you're so excited to share it with others. And I think that's incredible. I think everybody today should be very inspired by what you're saying and really implement it. I mean, everyone listening, whether you're a parent worried about the world or leaving your children, or a leader seeking new ways to bring people together, or simply someone who believes that love and healing are stronger than fear and division, I think everything Felicia said today is really just an inspiration to be part of the solution. So thank you for sharing all this, Phyllis. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for
Thank
everything.
you. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share with you and hear your insights and feedback. And just thank you so much.
Of course, of course. And listeners, America in Therapy is available now. I encourage you to not just read it, but let it change how you show up in the world. We also put the links to all the websites and platforms that Phyllis described earlier in the description box of this podcast today. So go ahead and get connected. In the meantime, just thank you for joining us on our episode today. We don't just interview successful authors, we explore the courage it takes to envision and write the world we need. So until next time, keep writing your mission into existence. Have a great day, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.